From bitter feuds between co-stars to shocking Oscar snubs and real-life protests mirroring the plot, the making of this groundbreaking 1961 film was as dramatic as the story itself. Behind Sidney Poitier's powerful performance lies a tale of creative battles, racial discrimination on set, and a playwright who tragically never saw her full potential realized. Fact 1. The stars hated each other off-camera. Behind the powerful on-screen chemistry between Sidney Poitier and Claudia McNeil, who played mother and son in A Raisin in the Sun, lay a bitter creative conflict that lasted throughout the entire Broadway run and film production. The tension between the two lead actors wasn't about personal dislike, but rather a fundamental disagreement about whose story was being told. McNeil believed the play was primarily about Lena Younger, the dignified matriarch holding her family together through impossible circumstances, and she wanted the production to reflect that maternal perspective. Poitier, on the other hand, saw the story through the eyes of Walter Lee Younger, the frustrated son whose dreams were being crushed by poverty and racism, and he fought to keep the focus on his character's journey. This artistic battle grew so heated during rehearsals and performances that years later, Poitier wrote in his memoir that he genuinely believed McNeil hated him for challenging her vision of the play. The arguments weren't quiet backstage disagreements either, as cast members and crew witnessed the two stars regularly at each other's throats over which approach would work best for the production. Despite their personal animosity and creative clashes, both actors delivered devastating performances that critics praised for their emotional depth and authenticity. The real-life tension between Poitier and McNeil actually added a layer of complexity to their on-screen relationship, as the strained mother-son dynamic audiences saw on film was partly fueled by genuine conflict between the performers. By the time director Daniel Petrie brought the play to the big screen in 1961, it seemed that Poitier had won the argument, as the film's emotional focus leans heavily toward Walter Lee's desperate struggle and personal transformation rather than centering entirely on his mother's experience. Fact 2. The film received 0 Oscar nominations. Despite earning widespread critical acclaim and being hailed as a groundbreaking achievement in American cinema, A Raisin in the Sun was completely shut out by the Academy Awards when nominations were announced for the 1962 ceremony. The film received absolutely 0 Oscar nominations, not a single acknowledgement in any category, which stunned critics and audiences who had expected the movie to earn recognition across multiple fields. Sidney Poitier, who had already been nominated for Best Actor just 3 years earlier for The Defiant Ones and would go on to win the Oscar for Lilies of the Field in 1964, was shockingly overlooked for his powerful performance as Walter Lee Younger. Claudia McNeil's tour de force portrayal of the family matriarch also went unrecognized, despite her receiving Golden Globe and BAFTA nominations for the same role. Even more surprising was the Academy's failure to nominate Lorraine Hansberry for Best Adapted Screenplay, considering she had adapted her own award-winning Broadway play and had already won the New York Drama Critics Circle Award. The film wasn't nominated for Best Picture, Best Director for Daniel Petrie, Best Supporting Actress for Ruby Dee or Diana Sands, or any technical categories despite its strong cinematography and editing. This complete Oscar snub was particularly glaring because the film did receive recognition from other major award bodies, including 2 Golden Globe nominations and a special Gary Cooper Award for Director Petrie at the Cannes Film Festival. Plus, Ruby Dee won the National Board of Review Award for Best Supporting Actress. The Academy's total dismissal of A Raisin in the Sun reflected Hollywood's historical pattern of overlooking films centered on African American experiences, a pattern that wouldn't begin to shift for many more decades. Fact 3. It was Louis Gossett Jr.'s film debut. When Louis Gossett Jr. stepped in front of movie cameras for the first time to recreate his Broadway role as George Murchison in A Raisin in the Sun, nobody could have predicted that this young theater actor was beginning a film career that would eventually earn him an Academy Award. Gossett played George Murchison, the wealthy, assimilated college student who courts Beneatha Younger, but dismisses her interest in African heritage and intellectual pursuits, representing a particular kind of Black American who had achieved financial success, but in Beneatha's view, had lost touch with his cultural roots. At the time of filming in 1960, Gossett was still primarily known as a stage actor who had originated the role during the play's historic 530 performance run on Broadway, starting in 1959. His film debut came at age 24, and while his role as George Murchison was relatively small compared to the central younger family members, it gave him valuable experience transitioning from stage acting to screen performance. The role required Gossett to portray a character who serves as a foil to both Walter Lee's desperate ambition and Beneatha's passionate idealism, representing a path of conventional success that the play quietly critiques. After this first film appearance, Gossett would go on to build an impressive career in both television and movies, though it would take another 22 years before he achieved his greatest Hollywood recognition by winning the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for his role as drill instructor Emil Foley in An Officer and a Gentleman in 1982, making him only the third black actor to win an Oscar in the first 60 years of the award's existence. Fact 4. Real neighbors protested during Chicago filming. When the production crew arrived to film exterior scenes at a house located at 4930 West Hirsch Street in Chicago during the summer of 1960, they encountered a disturbing situation that mirrored the very discrimination their movie was depicting. According to reports in the Chicago Defender newspaper and contemporary industry publications, white residents in the West Side Chicago neighborhood began protesting when they saw the large number of black cast and crew members gathering on their block for the shoot. Local neighbors actually started registering objections to what one report described as the jam of black people on scene, while others apparently protested because they mistakenly thought the neighborhood was being invaded by black residents rather than understanding it was a temporary film production. The house in question belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Anthony Casaccio, a middle-class Italian-American family with two sons who had agreed to let their home be used as the exterior of the house that Lena Younger purchases in the film's climactic scenes. The irony was almost too perfect, because the crew was literally filming scenes about a black family facing racist opposition when trying to move into a white neighborhood, while simultaneously experiencing that exact same racist opposition from actual neighbors during the production. This real-life echo of the film's central conflict created an uncomfortable atmosphere on set and served as a stark reminder that the issues Lorraine Hansberry had written about were not historical or exaggerated, but were actively playing out in 1960s America. The incident demonstrated that even though the story was set in the 1950s, racial housing discrimination remained a very present reality. Fact 5. The apartment had no private bathroom. One of the most telling details about the Younger family's poverty and cramped living conditions was a fact that modern audiences might easily overlook because it seems so shocking by today's standards. The family of 5 people living in their Southside Chicago apartment didn't have their own private bathroom inside their unit. Instead, they had to share a single hallway bathroom with other tenants in the building, including their neighbors, the Johnsons. This arrangement meant that every morning, family members had to compete not just with each other, but with people from other apartments for access to basic facilities, adding an extra layer of stress and indignity to their already difficult lives. The film makes this shared bathroom situation clear in early scenes where we see characters having to wait their turn and dealing with conflicts over bathroom access with neighbors, emphasizing how the family literally couldn't even have privacy for the most basic human needs. This living situation was actually common for many poor urban black families in mid-century Chicago, where discriminatory housing practices and restrictive covenants had created overcrowded conditions in the limited areas where black residents were allowed to live. The shared bathroom detail also serves an important dramatic purpose in the story because it helps explain why the insurance money and the possibility of buying a real house with their own facilities becomes so meaningful to the family, particularly to Ruth, who is pregnant and facing the prospect of bringing another child into these impossibly tight quarters. Young Travis has to sleep on the living room couch because there simply isn't room for him anywhere else, and the whole family dresses and undresses with minimal privacy in their 2-bedroom apartment that was never designed to house 5 people comfortably. Fact 6. Hansberry wrote it. Based on real events, Lorraine Hansberry didn't have to imagine what it felt like for a black family to face violent racism when moving into a white neighborhood because she had lived through that terrifying experience as a young child. In 1937, when Lorraine was just 8 years old, her father, Carl Hansberry, who was a successful real estate broker and one of the founders of the first bank for black customers in Chicago, decided to challenge the city's discriminatory housing practices by deliberately purchasing a house in a restricted white neighborhood. The family secretly bought a property at 6140 South Rhodes Avenue with the help of allies including Harry Pace, president of Supreme Liberty Life Insurance Company, and several white realtors who were willing to break the unofficial color barrier. When the Hansberry family moved into their new home in May of 1937, they were immediately met with hostility from white neighbors who were outraged that a black family had dared to move onto their block. A violent white mob gathered around the house, shouting threats and trying to intimidate the family into leaving. And during this terrifying confrontation, someone threw a brick through the window of the house that came dangerously close to hitting young Lorraine's head. Hansberry would later recall her mother patrolling the house all night with a loaded German Luger pistol, determined to protect her children from the angry crowd outside. The family refused to be driven out despite the threats and violence, and when the Illinois Supreme Court ordered them to leave, based on the legality of racially restrictive housing covenants. Carl Hansberry fought the case all the way to the United States Supreme Court, eventually winning the landmark case Hansberry versus Lee in 1940. Which helped begin the dismantling of legal housing discrimination across America. Fact 7. The title comes from Langston Hughes's poetry. The powerful and evocative title, A Raisin in the Sun, didn't come from Lorraine Hansberry's own imagination, but was instead borrowed from one of Satie's. The most famous poems by Langston Hughes, the legendary Harlem Renaissance poet. The poem, titled Harlem but also known as A Dream Deferred, was written in 1951 and appeared in Hughes's poetry collection, Montage of a Dream Deferred. The poem opens with a question that cuts to the heart of the African American experience during the mid-20th century, asking, what happens to a dream deferred, before offering a series of increasingly disturbing possible answers. The third line of the poem provides the phrase that Hansberry chose for her title, asking, does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? The image of a grape that was once plump and full of life slowly withering and shriveling in the harsh sunlight perfectly captured what Hansberry wanted to express about the younger family's situation, where dreams and aspirations were being slowly desiccated by poverty, racism, and limited opportunities. Hughes' poem continues with other dark possibilities for deferred dreams, asking if they fester like a sore, stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet, before ending with the ominous final line, or does it explode, which hints at the potential for violence when people's hopes are denied for too long. Hansberry's decision to use this line as her title immediately connected her work to the broader tradition of African American literature and the Harlem Renaissance's legacy of exploring black life and aspirations. The title appeared in the playbills for the Broadway production, and according to accounts, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. saw the play, read Hughes's poem in the program, and was so moved that he later incorporated its themes into his Easter sermon called Shattered Dreams and several other speeches. Fact 8. It required over 150 individual investors. When producer Philip Rose tried to get financial backing to turn Lorraine Hansberry's play into a movie, he ran into the same wall of resistance that had made producing the original Broadway show so difficult. Major Hollywood studios in 1960 looked at a script featuring an all-black principal cast dealing with themes of racial discrimination and housing segregation, and they simply refused to invest in what they considered a risky commercial venture that wouldn't appeal to white audiences. The film industry at that time was still deeply shaped by segregationist attitudes and the belief that movies centered on African American life couldn't be profitable, so mainstream studios wanted nothing to do with the project despite the play's enormous success on Broadway, where it had run for 530 performances. Left with no choice, Rose and his producing partners had to find funding the same way they had financed the original stage production, by courting individual investors one at a time and slowly piecing together enough money to make a low-budget film. According to production records, they eventually had to secure commitments from over 150 separate investors, each putting in relatively small amounts before they could finally gather sufficient funds to move forward with filming. This patchwork financing method meant the production had to operate on a very tight budget, which influenced many practical decisions, including how much of Hansberry's expanded screenplay could actually be filmed and how many location shoots they could afford beyond the main apartment set. The financial struggle to get the movie made served as yet another example of the systemic barriers facing Black artists and stories about Black life, even when those stories had already proven their artistic merit and commercial viability on the Broadway stage. Fact 9. 40% of the script was cut. When Lorraine Hansberry sat down to adapt her own Broadway play into a screenplay for the film version, she took the opportunity to expand the story beyond the confines of the single apartment set that had defined the stage production. Her original screenplay draft was significantly longer than what eventually appeared on screen and included numerous additional scenes that would have taken viewers outside the younger apartment to show Walter Lee's workplace as a chauffeur, more extensive street scenes in the South Side Chicago neighborhood, and expanded sequences exploring the housing discrimination and personal agency themes that were central to her vision. However, approximately 40% of Hansberry's original screenplay was ultimately cut during the editing process, with many of these scenes never filmed at all due to budget constraints and runtime considerations. The producers and studio were concerned about keeping the film to a commercially viable length and worried that too much expansion beyond the play's tested structure might alienate audiences who had loved the theatrical version. Some of the excised material dealt more explicitly with the systemic racism and housing discrimination that the younger family faced, giving greater context to their struggles and showing more of the broader social conditions that trapped them in poverty. Other cut scenes would have given more depth to Walter Lee's business schemes and his relationships with his friends Willie and Bobo, providing additional understanding of why he was so desperate to invest in the liquor store. The decision to streamline Hansberry's screenplay meant that the final film stayed closer to the play's intimate, claustrophobic feel rather than fully embracing cinema's ability to move freely through different locations and expand the world of the story, which some critics later suggested made the movie feel more like a film stage play than a true cinematic adaptation. Fact 10. The playwright died tragically young. Lorraine Hansberry's brilliant career as a playwright and her powerful voice for civil rights and social justice were cut devastatingly short when she died of pancreatic cancer on January 12, 1965, at the heartbreakingly young age of just 34 years old. She had been diagnosed with the disease in 1963 when she was only 33, and despite the doctor's best efforts and extensive hospital treatments, they were unable to remove or stop the cancer's progression. Hansberry continued writing and working throughout her illness, driven by her passion for storytelling and social change, even as her body weakened. Her second play, The Sign in Sidney Brustein's Window, which explored themes of political idealism and disillusionment in New York's Greenwich Village, opened on Broadway in 1964 to mixed reviews but managed to run for 101 performances, kept alive in part by her friends who rallied support to keep the production going. In a tragic coincidence that seemed almost too cruel to be real, The Sign in Sidney Brustein's Window closed on the exact same day that Hansberry died, as if her second play couldn't continue without her presence in the world. At her funeral, held at the Church of the Master near Harlem's Morningside Park, approximately 700 mourners gathered to pay tribute to a talent that had burned so brightly for such a brief time. Writer James Baldwin, who had been Hansberry's friend and had joined her in meetings with Attorney General Robert Kennedy about civil rights, later wrote that it wasn't far-fetched to think that the strain of witnessing and fighting against racial injustice had contributed to her early death, suggesting that the effort she had dedicated to the cause of equality was more than enough to kill anyone. Fact 11. The University of Chicago demanded anonymity. During location scouting and filming in Chicago, the production team wanted to shoot some scenes on the grounds of the University of Chicago, which would have provided authentic South Side Chicago atmosphere and given the film additional visual variety beyond the cramped apartment interiors. The university administration agreed to allow the production to use their campus for filming, but they attached one shocking and revealing condition to their permission that exposed the institutional racism present even in supposedly progressive academic settings. According to production reports, the University of Chicago specifically stipulated that the filmmakers could shoot on their property only if the institution's name was never mentioned or shown in the final film, essentially demanding anonymity and distance from any association with a movie about Black characters and racial discrimination. This requirement meant that the production couldn't include any shots showing the university's distinctive Gothic architecture with identifying features, couldn't have characters reference the school by name in dialogue, and had to carefully frame any scenes shot on campus to avoid anything that would tell viewers where the footage was filmed. The university's insistence on this condition suggested they were worried about being connected to a film dealing with controversial racial themes and didn't want alumni, donors, or the general public to associate their prestigious institution with a story about a poor black family fighting housing discrimination. This behind-the-scenes moment of institutional cowardice provided another real-world example of the kind of subtle racism and respectability politics that black artists and stories constantly faced, where even organizations that might have publicly supported integration and equality were privately unwilling to be visibly associated with black-centered narratives. Fact 12. Nearly the entire Broadway cast returned. In a highly unusual move for Hollywood adaptations of stage plays, the 1961 film version of A Raisin in the Sun brought back almost every single member of the original Broadway cast to recreate their roles on screen, giving the movie a remarkable level of performance depth and authenticity. Typically, when a successful play is adapted into a film, studios insist on replacing most of the stage actors with bigger Hollywood names who can help sell tickets, maybe keeping one or two of the original performers while filling out the rest of the cast with movie stars. But A Raisin in the Sun took a different approach, trusting that the actors who had lived with these characters through 530 Broadway performances would bring an irreplaceable understanding and emotional truth to the film version. Sidney Poitier returned as Walter Lee Younger. Claudia McNeil reprised her role as the matriarch Lena Younger. Ruby Dee came back as Walter's wife Ruth. Diana Sands again played the intellectually ambitious Beneatha, and even supporting players like Ivan Dixon as Assagai, Louis Gossett Jr. as George Murchison, and John Fiedler as the uncomfortable white representative Carl Lindner all recreated their stage performances for the cameras. This continuity meant that the cast had already spent well over a year exploring every nuance of their characters, working through the emotional beats of the story and developing the complex family dynamics that made the play so powerful. The actors knew their lines backwards and forwards, understood the rhythm and flow of Lorraine Hansberry's dialogue, and had received feedback from hundreds of live audiences about which moments landed most effectively. This deep familiarity with the material shows in the film's performances, which feel lived in and authentic, rather than like actors still discovering their characters during filming. Fact 13. It inspired Martin Luther King Jr. The impact of A Raisin in the Sun extended far beyond theater and film audiences to influence one of the most important voices of the civil rights movement. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. attended a performance of Lorraine Hansberry's play during its Broadway run, and like countless other viewers, he was deeply moved by the Younger family's story and its exploration of dreams, deferred by racism and economic injustice. When Dr. King picked up the playbill at the theater, he encountered Langston Hughes's poem, Harlem, which Hansberry had used as the source for her title, and the poem's powerful questions about what happens to dreams that are constantly postponed resonated strongly with King's own thinking about the African-American struggle for equality and justice. According to scholar W. Jason Miller, Dr. King was so affected by both the play and the poem that he later wrote a letter to Langston Hughes telling him, "I can no longer count the number of times and places in which I have read your poems," acknowledging the profound influence Hughes's words had on his own work. Just 3 weeks after seeing the play and reading the poem, Dr. King incorporated themes from Harlem into his Easter sermon titled Shattered Dreams, exploring the spiritual and psychological damage caused when people's hopes and aspirations are repeatedly crushed by systemic oppression. King would continue to reference these ideas in several of his most memorable speeches throughout the civil rights movement, using the imagery of deferred dreams to help audiences understand the frustration and desperation felt by Black Americans who had been promised equality but had seen that promise delayed decade after decade. The connection between Hansberry's play, Hughes' poetry, and King's oratory created a powerful cultural moment where theater, literature, and activism all reinforced the same urgent message about the need for immediate social change. Fact 14. the neighborhood filming caused real evictions. The Casaccio family, who owned the house at 4930 West Hirsch Street that was used for crucial exterior scenes in the film, experienced a devastating aftermath from their decision to allow the production to use their home. Mr. and Mrs. Anthony Casaccio were a middle-class Italian-American couple with 2 sons who lived in the West Side Chicago neighborhood where the film crew wanted to shoot the scenes showing the house that Lena Younger purchases for her family. The Casaccios agreed to let their property appear in the movie, perhaps not fully anticipating how their neighbors would react to seeing black cast and crew members gathering on their block during filming. According to reports from the time, after the production wrapped and the film was released, the Casaccio family was reportedly forced out of their neighborhood, apparently facing pressure or hostility from other residents who were unhappy about the association with a film about racial integration. The tragic irony of this situation was almost unbearable because the Casaccios experienced the exact same type of discrimination and forced displacement that the movie itself was depicting, becoming real-life victims of the very racism that Lorraine Hansberry's story condemned. A family who had simply allowed filmmakers to use their house for a few days ended up losing their home and community because of racial prejudice, demonstrating that the issues in A Raisin in the Sun weren't exaggerated drama, but were frighteningly real problems that could destroy people's lives. The incident served as a stark reminder that in 1960 and 61 America, even the simple act of being associated with a story about black people moving into white neighborhoods could bring down social punishment and economic consequences on those who showed any openness to integration. Fact 15. Hansberry won at 29, died at 34. The trajectory of Lorraine Hansberry's life contains a brilliance and tragedy that makes her early death even more heartbreaking when you consider what she accomplished in such a brief window of time. When A Raisin in the Sun opened at the Ethel Barrymore Theater on Broadway on March 11, 1959, Hansberry was just 29 years old, making her the youngest American playwright to ever win the New York Drama Critics Circle Award for Best Play, which the production earned later that year. She was also the first black dramatist and only the 5th woman to receive that prestigious honor, breaking through multiple barriers at once with her debut work. The play was also nominated for 4 Tony Awards, including Best Play, Best Actor for Sidney Poitier, Best Actress for Claudia McNeil, and Best Director for Lloyd Richards, making Hansberry the first African-American woman to have a play produced on Broadway. Just 2 years later, in 1961, the film adaptation was released to critical acclaim, and Hansberry seemed poised for a long and influential career as one of America's most important dramatic voices. She was writing her second play, meeting with Attorney General Robert Kennedy about civil rights alongside James Baldwin, and becoming increasingly involved in activism for racial justice and other social causes. But then came the cancer diagnosis in 1963 when she was only 33 years old, and just 2 years after that, on January 12, 1965, Hansberry was gone. The mathematics of her life are simply stunning to contemplate because she went from unknown writer to Broadway sensation, to cultural icon, to dead from cancer, all within the span of just 6 years, winning her greatest triumph at 29 and dying at 34, leaving behind only 2 produced plays and a handful of other writings when she clearly had decades of important work still ahead of her.